Yeah, I think it is expensive.
Alright, the speech drop for everyone who wants to look at the docs for this debate. S, capital M, G, B, capital Y, capital R.
Do that again.
Lowercase s, capital M, lowercase g, lowercase b, capital Y, capital R. Okay, I'll wait for it.
So, Taipei Affirmative? Yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't on him. I wasn't making any.
What? Yeah, just ask for some questions. Leave number one.
I was gonna say, I don't think I've
Some people say you can't smoke. Don't give me
Yes, I
Thank you, sir.
I know, this is almost Bill from Hayes.
He's just, he's first.
Well, that's kind of what it is. You know who I'm talking about. Bill Shanahan, yes.
Can you give me the code again?
Alright, lowercase s, capital M, lowercase g, lowercase b, y, R.
Capital Y, capital
Alright,
Don't do it yet.
yeah.
A lot of people.
A lot of people.
A lot of moving parts.
It's called what?
Speech drop. Yeah, January. You gotta write children up.
What are you talking, what are you saying?
Him.
What is it? S?
Small s, capital M, small g, small b, capital Y, capital R.
I think I have it. Well, I learned something new, my kids maybe will.
Alright. Are y'all ready?
Yeah, good.
Okay, so,
I'm not.
like right before the speech, first, we'd like to thank the Barkley Forum, Emory University, Chairman Director Ed Lee, Chairman Administrator Kara Grant, Pelham Debate Event Chair Michaela Mollison, the Pelham Debate TAP staff, and the coaches of the Gold Key Society for leading this fantastic tournament. We've truly enjoyed our time in Atlanta, and we would not be competing without your organization, efficiency, and volunteerism. Second, thank you to the Taipei American School Administration, faculty, and staff for their continued support of our speech and debate team. As we travel the world to attend tournaments, it means the world to us to know that you are cheering us on back at home. Third, we would like to thank our families for your consistent support and encouragement. To our parents and siblings, we couldn't do this without you. We love you very much and hope to make you proud. We'd also like to thank our coaches, Mr. Williams, Mr. Zoe, Mr. Cook, Jet, Jimin, Ian, Miss Jessie, and the entire Asian Debate League staff. Thank you for all you have done to help us to get to this point. We cannot ask for a better village to have in our corner. To the TAS Speech and Debate team, thank you for being an integral part of this journey. There is no one we'd rather travel around the world with. To the Policy Debate Squad, thank you for all the work you have done, and this round's for you. To Dylan, thank you for being my partner for the last 2 years. It's been a wild ride, but I'm glad to have done it together. Speech and debate is a life-changing activity, and we are so thankful to the members of this community. From bubble rounds on Zoom at 4 a.m. in the morning to flying 8,608 miles to get to this tournament this weekend. International debate has its challenges, but we are so honored to be part of this activity, expansion around the globe. We may be the first international team to reach this stage, but we know that we will not be the last. With that, we'll begin the affirmative case. Advantage 1 is inequality. Domestic income inequality exists and is rising now. Quarshi 23. Inequality has risen, a major policy concern. Inequalities are close to peak levels. Income inequality has risen in advanced economies and emerging economies, which account for 85% of GDP. Low and middle income groups have suffered from a loss of income share with the erosion of the middle class and a decline in mobility. Within country, income inequality has risen. Growth data is wrong. The economy is unstable and there's a high risk of future recessions if we don't address inequality. Jacobs 23. Why do traditional indicators capture economic health in contrast to the experiences of people? 32% of adults are falling behind with payments, 25% are struggling to afford food. America's highest levels of income concentration explain the dissonance between figures and realities. The economy is in a precarious state. Reliance on credit masks economic distress. Poor job quality makes labor power unrepresentative of the economy. As inequality increased, data economics rely on becomes skewed. Inequality is a time bomb that will wreak havoc if not constrained. U.S. growth prompted economics to articulate a sanguine view of the economy. Optimism is hard to reconcile with stimulus, ending inflation, decreased wages prompt distress. 2/3 of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 40% have trouble paying for medical care. Anti-worker policies make bottom brackets susceptible to income shocks. Tech changes eroded many middle-income jobs, leading to polarization and the rise of inequality. This can produce a speculative financial system where bubbles frequently emerge. As the financial risk-taking increases, danger of fiscal crisis grows. Economics repeatedly found that inequality makes recessions deeper while limiting growth. We are likely to hear commentators articulating the economy is strong, ignoring the ways high inequality masks deep systemic weaknesses and risk. And a universal cash benefit stabilizes the economy. Points 19. UBI provide generous cash benefits to live on without other earnings. It does not phase out. It is available in a large proportion rather than particular subset. UBI might seem as in response to inadequacies of the current social safety net. A large share of the current transfer spending goes to specific populations. Is often heavily means tested. A UBI would smooth out the uneven distribution with distributional effects. UBIs would cost double current spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. A full-scale UBI would require a substantial increase in government revenue. Economic inequality is an existential risk. It will cause climate change, institutional collapse, and violent conflict due to social polarization. Schmidt 23. Inequality reduction makes a positive difference to EV of the long future. Inequality might have negative effects of climate change, public institutions, conflict, and polarization. Inequality increases a country's carbon footprint. Climate change is in itself an X risk. Increased attempts, extreme weather, destabilization of conflict. High inequality will reduce growth rates. Public institutions that function. Disaster preparedness, education, public health, foreign policy, science. Good institutions reduce existential risk. Inequality reduces institutional quality. High inequality can lead to elite capture. Growing consensus if institutions are geared towards elite interests. More rent-seeking and less investment in public goods. High inequality is likely to reduce social capital and trust. Social capital and lower inequality exhibit preventative and adaptive outcomes to external shocks. Bad conditions might increase existential risk. Conflict between and within nations. Armed races race to such a nuclear war. More likely a conflict of warheads, cyber weapons, and bioweapons. Social polarization increases the risk of violent conflict. Inequality might get populist candidate elected. Independently, artificial intelligence will be integrated into work. The plan is needed to reduce negative externalities. Laurie 23. Economics estimated 2/3 of occupations exposed. Automation tech will wipe out 300 million jobs if the AI does not destroy humanity outright. It should lift the productivity of growth. The problem is that we do not have any policies to support workers in the event that AI causes mass job loss. UBI is simple and radical. The government would raise revenue by raising taxes to distribute the money with no strings attached. Workers will adapt when shifting into new jobs impervious to automation. But if obsolescence happens quickly, unemployment and wage stagnation are likely with inequality yawning at unseen levels. UBI would be act as a tax and transfer on steroids, societal insurance regardless of participation in the job market. Advantage 2 is welfare reform. Social Security and Medicare are fiscally unsustainable. Without taxation, Congress will issue unsustainable debt. Bosnia 23. SS and Medicare exceed $78 trillion in terms of underfunded obligations, 600,000 for every household over the next 75 years. Neither funds hold any real assets beyond IOU. Bonds don't make paying obligations possible. They issue government debt. The federal government promises benefits that it can't pay for, creating an uncertain future for those interested. That Medicare spending will double to $2.4 trillion. SS to $2.12 trillion. Medicare SS are responsible for 95% of total U.S. underfunded obligations. If Congress does nothing, beneficiaries would see the drastic benefit cuts. Medicare and Social Security spending is unsustainable. Failure of Social Security spills over to all welfare. Bloomberg 22. Experts agree populations will lack resources to live. This will burden the country's safety net. It could overwhelm state budgets by 2030. the U.S. will have more retirees, 73 million 65 and over, 21% of the country's population, up from 15% in 2016. A lack of savings is a fiscal disaster. The more people with inadequate resources, the more they will rely on welfare programs such as Medicaid. Today's patchwork of options isn't helping. Specifically, Medicare and Medicaid collapse under pressure, destroying the U.S. healthcare system. O'Brien, 23. Federal government is a large source of revenue and medical providers in the form of Medicare and Medicaid. If the federal government can't pay its bills, the entire thing stops. The whole healthcare system collapses. Governments would stop making payments immediately. Trickle-down implications would make their way through the medical systems. Hospitals could cancel procedures. Disrupted payments would hit nursing homes and rehab facilities. Absent a plan's taxation, Congress will be forced to deficit trillions to shore up Social Security. Carlson, 23. Estimates is SS will not run out in 2033. That is optimistic, and the fund will run out shortly a few years before. Worst case, Congress does nothing. It is more likely Congress will step in at the last minute to make up for the shortfalls and supplementing Social Security with a general fund, moving away from a self-supported program. Financial problems are causing bad decisions. Irresponsible debt insurance collapses U.S. hegemony and international credibility. Bossia, 23. Spending debates place constraints on America's military defense priorities will be squeezed. National security leaders argue that debt is the single greatest threat to our national security. Debt would be slow growth and harm on national security. It would constrain funding for a strong military diplomacy and draw resources away from investments that are essential to strength and leading. Delay fiscal reforms invites national decline. Debt leads to a risk of fiscal crisis. A weaker economy impact America's standing. Fiscal crisis would erode the foundation of American strength. Decline in strength makes conflict with Russia and China likely. Rudolph, 20 states in the course of expansion come into conflict with other powers, even if emerging powers do not pursue an aggressive revisionist foreign policy. Power shifts pose a considerable risk to the stability of the international system. Hegemonic wars result from imbalances. Like Clydius Trapp testifies with the risk with China rise. It does not require discussion as to what extent China acts as a revisionist power. States may aim to maintain the status quo in some areas and be revisionist in the others. The term revisionist stakeholder sums up China's position. Thus, the plan, the United States federal government should expand Social Security in the United States by reducing eligibility qualifications and increasing benefits to a substantial universal amount funded by a progressive tax. A basic income financed by a progressive tax is a sustainable solution to address inequality and create a safety net. Abramovich, 20. Poor and working class people have long known the net doesn't catch you when you fall. The time is right for revolutions in America. Social policy relying small improvements cannot fix the separate, unequal systems. They are too abusive, and bureaucracies harness the police rather than help. Many who seek help are intimidated, get simply turned away. They are not glitches. The welfare state is broken. The system was clunkier and designed to fall. We need a fresh start that gives people money without conditions. Universal cash payments such as Social Security for all is not new. And a key part of this proposal was the cash aid program to the IRS as a way to shrink the welfare state. UBI is gaining momentum. Poor people are no longer poor people prefer no strings attached to complex programs, and they put money into good practical uses. UBI would function like a permanent strike fund, giving workers the ability to refuse unsafe and poorly paid work. We propose turning Social Security into a guaranteed income program. SS is our most efficient program. 99 cents of every dollar goes to the benefit infrastructure of SS. Distributes checks through the mail has a far broader scope. The program is progressive. Lower workers get a higher benefit relative to earnings. The program of economic security must have an adequate income. Basic income will be conditional, not means tested. All existing recipients would get higher monthly checks. The range of potential funding jobs is wealth tax, higher corporate tax, financial transaction tax, increase income taxes or taxes on unearned income. Alright, cut the card there.
Are you ready for cross-examination?
Yes.
My first question is, how much would the basic income be?
So our evidence says that it would be a livable wage, enough to resolve income inequality within the United States.
What constitutes a livable wage?
Well, a livable wage is something that fluctuates, but most likely would be between $20,000 and $40,000.
Okay, you've described how automation is going to replace jobs in the status quo. What evidence indicates that about $20,000 to $40,000 is sufficient to replace the income lost due to automation?
So the income lost due to automation is because people would no longer have jobs. Our evidence says that when they get a basic income, that would supplement for the amount of earnings that they would have on a yearly basis due to the loss of jobs from automation. So it would give them a safety net.
My next question is about the taxes of the affirmative. What progressive taxes would the plan implement?
So progressive taxes, it's not about what kind of progressive taxes we would implement. It would probably most likely be an income tax, but how a progressive tax works is that depending on how much money you earn, you'd be taxed a certain amount, and rich people would be taxed more, which also helps our inequality advantage in the sense that it would sort of reduce the income gap between the rich and the poor.
To what rate would the plan raise income taxes?
What rate? So our evidence specifies depending on the expensiveness of a basic income and how it fluctuates, our evidence says it would be close to a 20 to 30% increase in income.
That makes
in
sense.
progressive
The
tax.
Gale evidence also specifies other types of taxes, like capital gains tax, a value-added tax. Could the plan pass those taxes, or would it be an income tax?
Most likely it would be an income tax.
Okay, I wanted to clarify, what is the reason that high debt collapses U.S. readiness?
So our evidence, I think it's the Bosnia evidence, says that it is the single greatest threat to our national security because it would constrain funding for the U.S. military. It would force huge debt debates in Congress, which makes Congress not able to sort of respond to different risks that are coming up within the world. And it says that it would cause a fiscal crisis, which would erode the foundation of American strength, and it would also hurt how the U.S. portrays itself to alliances.
I want to ask about the first part of that. The debt is $34 trillion, yet the U.S. has the highest military spending of any country in the world. So why would debt trade off with that military spending?
So the way you quantify debt in this instance is a question of what the debt is going to be in the future. So our evidence says that Medicare and Social Security, if we do not make a change now, it's going to cause $75 billion more of underfunded obligations, which would severely constrain the United States. And that is what all of our evidence is.
Given that the debt is $34
75
trillion.
My bad. Sorry, what did you say?
Okay. Secondly, why do allies uniquely perceive that amount rather than perceive $34 trillion?
Because that's not our internal link. Our internal link is about the perception when the U.S. is constrained in facing fiscal crisis, what trillions of debt would cause. Are you guys just going to use it?
We understand.
All right.
I'm jealous. Yeah, I don't even know where
The one has been uploaded. Before I start, I would like to give a few thank yous. First, I would like to thank the Pelham Foundation and Barkley Forum. I would also like to thank Kara Grant and Dr. Michaela Milhausen for all the work that they've done putting this entire tournament together. Second, I would like to thank all of the key coaches for their contributions and dedication to their community, as well as for the time that they are spending judging this debate. Debate is an incredibly important activity and could not exist in this current state without all of their hard work. Third, I would like to thank the LASA debate coaches, Yao Chin, David Kilpatrick, and Nihar Abayankar for all that they have done for ensuring that for the LASA debate team. LASA debate gets very little support from the school, and all of these coaches put so much effort and time into the team to ensure that it can run and we can go to tournaments. Without them, the LASA debate program did not exist in its current state. I would also like to thank my parents for being supportive of my debate career and making sure I can continue to participate in this activity. Finally, I want to thank Eleanor for being such a great partner this year. She has consistently pushed me to do my best and has been a great source of moral support. With that being said, I will start the first negative constructive.
What'd you say the order was?
It's 2 off, the inequality advantage, the welfare advantage. First off is the inflation DA. Inflation is low now. The Fed's preferred indicators confirm that a rate cut is expected, but it's not guaranteed. Survivor 128. Fed's preferred gauge of inflation rose at the slowest pace in nearly 3 years. Officials will soon cut borrowing costs. PCE advanced 0.2%. Inflation retreat at a much faster rate than the Fed anticipated, dodging a recession. Fed officials have been cautious and want to see sustainable signs of cooling. Chance that the Fed will cut rates in March. The Fed will react to a UBI with interest rate hikes. That guarantees inflation and inflationary expectations. Mitchell 17. Basic income would persuade the unemployed to drop out of the labor force. The value of the currency would fall given nothing is provided in return. The resulting inflation invoked rate adjustments that would constrain the economy. The excess demand would accentuate the inflationary pressure. The basic income constitutes an indiscriminate Keynesian expansion and lacks inbuilt price stabilization mechanisms. The greater share of the income generated, the higher the inflation risk. The firms would compete for fewer workers and drive up wages. The central bank would respond by raising interest rates. Sustained higher rates crush high-tech and biotech innovation. Rasco and Williams 23. Tech companies announced layoffs due to higher borrowing costs. Tech borrowed when rates were low to grow. high rates hit techs hard. Tech's all about growth. The formula was taking on debt, hope for growth. Over time, profit. If rates get higher, it makes it harder to borrow. Because rates were ultra low, they loaded up on debt. They are in a pickle. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta have loss of employees, a mass firing. Startups are caught in this vice grip. Growth rates are going to slow down. Startups won't get funding. Investors are skeptical of risk. They need a lot of money with R&D investing. The US is winning the tech race. Continued tech investment and innovation is key to avert an authoritarian PRC-led economic order that destroys the LIO. That's Kerry et al. Tin 3. China's intent to surpass the US is a tech superpower. The economy is undergoing revolution by rapid emerging tech. PRC executing a strategy to achieve primacy. Overlapping progress in AI, biotech, quantum alter the landscape. The race for tech and econ leadership is a central geostrategic battleground. Nations that lead will govern and develop military advantage. Tech dictate competitiveness. The US will need sizable investments to accomplish strategic goals. The PRC displaced the US. Ramifications for international rules. US has expertise, resources, and tools. The key whether US can orientate endowments to compete. Loss of tech competitiveness causes nuclear war. Kronig 21. Spread of new tech to the US and allies reinforce stability. Deter attacks. Beijing employ new tech in ways that are destabilizing. If Moscow shifts the balance of power, it would pursue revisionist aims. If China acquired enhanced ability, invade Taiwan or the SCS. Shifts in power lead to war. New tech exacerbate uncertainty and result in conflict. There would be a risk of nuclear escalation. Difficult for the US to back down. China is projected to quadruple its arsenal. A coming RMA provides a real or perceived advantage, raises a likelihood of aggression against allies and nuclear escalation. Russia and China would disrupt the international order. Any tech that promises to shift the balance of power threatens nuclear strategic stability. Tech changes that reinforce the prevailing system will strengthen stability. Democracies should invest to maintain an edge. Next off is the benefits bit. The United States federal government should increase progressive taxes. The counterplan solves the welfare advantage. Their Gale card is a solvency advocate. It says that progressive taxation can generate trillions of dollars of revenue, which is sufficient to resolve government debt and excessive Social Security expenditures. Next, the inequality advantage. 1. A basic income increases poverty and inequality. This is an indict to Alaska, Finland, Kenya, and the Y Combinator studies, the Mignot 18. Professions rising in demand need help workers adjust. Under a UBI, Americans work part-time, leave labor, and change decisions, less participation. The economy would suffer. Growth is dependent on the growth of labor. Tax revenues would fall. UBI expensive to impossibility, 1/8 of the GDP. Higher taxes unheard of, a 73% increase, and neglect SS, which needs support to remain solvent. UBI replace programs, people lose Medicaid, insurance, Social Security. Hit the disadvantage harder. Replacing with UBI would reduce benefits by 19,100. Trade-offs necessary cause harm to vulnerable populations. Idea scarcely tested, Finland refused funding, Alaska poor comparison, Kenya different stage, Silicon Valley still early. Be wary of studies that simulate upside without downsides, benefit cuts, or tax increases. Second, no automation, or Dunda 21. World Economic Forum released report estimating 85 million jobs displaced by a shift in labor. Even more roles will open as a result of the shift. 97 million better opportunities for early career professionals. The more computers train repetitive tasks, the more roles with competitive salaries arise, a wider range of careers. People entering the workforce struggle because they compete with seniors. Disadvantage disappears as new roles are created. 3. Inequality is statistically insignificant, right at all 19. Papers assume inequality increased. Measures affected by a failure to account for government transfers and benefits that substitute income. Failure to account insurance. Insurance reduces the gap. Upward trend in inequality is muted. We should see up in consumption ratio between haves and have-nots. Growth is smaller than income. Growth is not consistent with increasing and decreasing inequality. Concerns overblown. 4. No impact to inequality. Must 16. Does inequality lead to conflict? Results mixed. Struggles to establish a firm relationship. However, it is minority groups who rebel, not the whole population. Studies are based on objective inequalities. People take action because of perceived injustices rather than measured statistical inequalities might not be aware. The Gini coefficient completely aside how inequality is actually perceived. Cross-country analysis have neglected perceptions. Analyzing data from the period 1989 to 2014, mere objective regional economic inequalities do not have any significant effect. Next, the welfare advantage. First, Social Security is sustainable. The trust fund running out will have minimal impact in intervening after SALS, per FAS 23. Financial projections are just projections. Does Social Security go belly up? No. Let's say the amount coming in pays 75%. Does everybody get 75% or just a few? Congress will do something. Many factors affect the future. People were worried economic fallout, accelerated depletion. That didn't happen. I don't think it's inevitable. It's not the case that spending has grown because of inefficiencies. The problem is structural. Second, debt is good for growth, especially now. Kuttner 23. What is responsible for growth? Federal deficit used to finance public outlay, lots of stimulus. Spending and public investment fuels growth. Growth stronger, debt ratio will be better. Economy portends a continued recovery. Interest rates not done damage. Factors roughly balance each other. 3, the U.S. has no constraints on their debt, but trying to balance it causes a global economic crisis. Schriefenberger and Blyth 23. Should we be concerned? Chances are give it away round of tax cuts. Build world economy, build biggest importer. Long-term interest rates gives us consumption power. We actually balance the books. Economies of China, Japan, and Germany would explode. Nobody to buy the massive amount of stuff that they produce. Their own economies couldn't possibly absorb. Deficit sign people hold our currency and our debt. There is no alternative. Fretting about the deficit, nonsensical. If global financial hegemon don't have these constraints.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So, I'd like to talk about the Kuttner evidence you read on the case. You said that debt is good.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, on the this side that you read, in this text, it says that debt is bad for the economy. How do you remedy these two things?
I don't think we said that debt is bad for the economy. The argument that we have made for why debt is good is because it finances productive investment that can boost growth.
I completely disagree with that assessment. Your 1C evidence says that debt would cause companies to not be able to innovate. And you said debt is good.
Oh, there's a distinction. Our argument for debt being good is that public debt, i.e. the debt that is held by the federal government, is good. That's distinct from private debt, which is the debt held by corporations like innovative tech firms and tech startups.
My next question regards this. So on the disadvantage, you said that higher interest rates would hurt companies' innovation capabilities. Interest rates have been high for the past 3 years. Is there anything?
Our evidence assumes the interest rates and where they have been for the past 3 years. It makes the claim that companies are on the brink right now as a result of these continued high rates. However,
why does it say it's on the brink?
We think that they've started financing their debt to some extent, but if rates are not lowered in the near future, these companies would be unable to continue financing their debt because interest rates are directly correlated to how loans are calculated by banks and other financial institutions.
Okay, you said that the federal government will react with huge interest rate hikes.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
We think that the plan resulting in an expansion of the basic income would be highly inflationary, which means the Federal Reserve would raise interest rates as a way to deflate the economy and reduce inflation.
Okay, and then for the impact, why would that cause war with China?
We think that by increasing rates, that makes it so tech startups and tech companies can no longer finance their debt and would cause many to go under. Tech competitiveness is important in the future as a way to combat China and Russia and the tech gains they're trying to make. The Koronic evidence makes a very specific claim that in the future, the key determinant of the balance of power will be new technological innovation.
So my next question is, why can't the government just fund these private startups if they're if they're having huge amounts of debt?
Well, the government doesn't fund private startups right now. They don't have an incentive to just invest in a bunch of private
But
companies.
if they see all their private corporations collapsing, shouldn't they do something about it?
I mean, in theory, yes, but the way the government works is the government often does things that aren't the best possible policy.
So if we win that the government, it would most likely, when seeing all their private corporations failing, bail them out and give them money, do you still have the argument?
No, because the government would not bail them out. There's not an empirical history of many bailouts happening.
That's fine. On the benefits pick, you said that you cite the 1AC Gale evidence as our solvency advocate.
Yep.
We didn't read a 1AC Gale card. What are you referring to?
I mean, I think broadly the cards that you have read that says progressive taxation is
Can you list another piece of evidence?
Yeah, if I go to my computer, I can.
The Arbowitz card, it's the first card on solvency, indicates that progressive taxation is sufficient to reduce inequality, and also it's the mechanism by which the AF reduces the debt. The counterplan does that as well.
Alright, 8 minutes of prep time, sorry.
I said
Never mind,
now.
he seconded.
has everybody opened up the doc, or at least opened it up? Alright. The order is going to be the inequality advantage, the welfare advantage, the benefits pick, and then the economy disadvantage.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, the inequality advantage, the welfare advantage, the benefits pick, and the economy disadvantage. Before I begin, I just want to quickly echo everything that Jordan said in his thank you speech earlier, but specifically, I want to thank Jordan, who I am also extremely grateful for sharing this moment with. Okay. Now, is everybody good for the speech? All right, that's great. Inequality outweighs. It undermines foundations of society, which ruins resilience of public institutions and global cooperation. This causes collapse, climate change, and disease, which all three impacts were dropped. Solving it caps all of the negative impacts. That's the 1AC Schmidt evidence. The first argument that they made on case is that the basic income increases poverty. This is wrong. There are two answers. First, the card cites warrants like people leaving the workforce. This is a non-unique argument. Our automation evidence shows that people are already losing their jobs, so there's only a risk that the affirmative would help this argument. Secondly, their evidence cites studies about a $12,000 a year basic income. That is not the affirmative. 1AC cross-examination was extremely clear and says that we provide 20 to 40K a year, which is almost quadruple that amount. The second argument they make is no automation. This is wrong. The new jobs that their evidence cites are high-skill and high-tech jobs like web designers and computer scientists. This is different from the inequality arguments that we're making. Their card concedes that 85 million low-skill jobs will be taken away. This is our impact. The third argument they make is that that inequality is insignificant. This is wrong. Their evidence is from 5 years ago. You should prefer our Jacobs evidence from 2023, which cites recent developments like COVID-19 and recent economic downturns. The fourth argument they make is that there's no impact to inequality. This is wrong. We think inequality is uniquely bad and the judges should reject it, but it is also an internal link to impacts like climate change, collapse, and disease, which they have dropped on advantage 2. Debt collapse causes war. It ruins the U.S. military operability, allowing China and Russia to initiate hegemonic wars, which causes power shifts and risk instability. That's the 1AC Rudolph evidence. The first argument that they've made is that Social Security is sustainable. This is wrong. Our evidence is about the long-term sustainability of Social Security. It conducts an analysis over the next 75 years and concludes that it will be over $78 trillion in debt. Their evidence is a snapshot of what the current Social Security system looks like. It says that it is sustainable in the status quo. They can win that argument, but they still lose because it is unsustainable long-term, which is our argument. The second argument they make is the Kuttner evidence. Star this on your flow. The Kuttner evidence in the highlighted portion says that interest rates do not hurt the economy. I will specifically concede this. This is absolute. The 2NC cannot come back from this. This means that they have no impact on the economy disadvantage because interest rates do not hurt the economy. But independently, public debt could be good for growth, which is what their evidence is contextual to, but it is bad and causes war. That was the impact explanation I've done above. Third, they say that the U.S. has no debt constraints now. This is wrong. The debt ceiling empirically disproves this on the benefits counterplan. First, permutation do both. The government can both increase progressive taxes and expand benefits. 2, expanding Social Security benefits is key. The counterplan only expands taxes. It doesn't do benefits. The first subpoint for why is debt. $78 trillion of unfunded obligations over the next 75 years. Only increasing the tax-funded revenue is a sustainable method of funding. That's the Bakia evidence. Otherwise, either the entire system collapses, which destroys the economy, or the government deficit spends, which also destroys U.S. hegemony. That's the Pottinger evidence. B is solvency. Only delivering a basic income through the infrastructure of a Social Security Administration would solve and stimulate the economy. All other models fail. C is the inequality deficit. The counter plan does not provide people with benefits, which means that it can never solve for the inequality that is ongoing, which is the largest impact in this round, given that the 1NC has dropped impacts like climate change and collapse that inequality is uniquely causing now on the economy disadvantage. First, growth is unsustainable. Their data is wrong. They are taking short-term indicators that ignore the systemic weaknesses that make recessions inevitable. That's inequality, high wealth concentration, and anti-work policy erodes the middle class. Jacobs 23. Anti-worker policies making bottom brackets susceptible to income shocks. Tech change eroded many middle-income jobs, leading to polarization and rising of inequality that can produce a speculative financial system where bubbles frequently emerge as financial risk-taking increases. Dangers of financial crises grow. Economists repeatedly found that inequality makes recessions deeper while limiting economic growth. We are likely to hear commentators articulating the economy is strong, ignoring the ways that high inequality masks systemic weaknesses and risk. B is the credit argument. Americans can't afford basic needs and over-rely on bad debt, which will default now. That is the Jacobs 23 evidence that was read above and was also read in the first affirmative constructive, which they did not answer. Subpoint C is automation. Over 2/3 of jobs are exposed to automation, which will cause unemployment now. That's the Lori evidence in the first affirmative constructive, which is inserted for you to look at. D is healthcare. A failing healthcare system would wreck the economy. Fox 17. Health costs impede spending, also reduce income. $1 spent on healthcare translates into more than $1 not spent elsewhere. Cost is rising due to prescription costs and premiums, mandated or passed on because of uncertainty. If you need healthcare, you are not able to work, so you will curtail expenses in a drastic manner. Boomers will unload assets to gain access to real estate. The future will suffer, and fixed income products will be unloaded. Stocks will suffer, and the impact of double of rising rates and deflation. Demographics and economics make this scenario, if realized, have drastic consequences. E is the deficit spending argument. Future patchwork financing to shore up current failing welfare in the United States crushes U.S. leadership. That's the Balkia evidence, which would turn their impact of U.S. tech leadership. Next argument. Snapshot datas are unreliable. Authors 23. Monthly data was useful, now it's a crunch for not paying attention over time. LIE over time has been a useful summary to demonstrate risk of recessions. They're not leading, they're lagging, and they're not indicating anything much except that human intention is constant. The employment market is rude. Health LEI signals the imminent recession. The one clear conclusion is that there should be a payoff for paying attention despite plenty are 3. But the plan makes growth sustainable. A UBI would solve inequality by providing basic needs and strengthening labor protections. That's the 1AC evidence. 4. The negative links are conservative propaganda. Right 23. Dire warnings of fiscal hawks are darkening the skies in official Washington. It's always the same when Republicans take over. They rack up giant deficits by cutting taxes on corporations and the wealthy. A half-century ago, American wealthy have financed the gov through tax payments. Tax rates on the wealthy were high, over 90%. Since then, tax cuts on Reagan, Bush, and Trump. Tax rate plummeted even as rich accumulated unprecedented wealth. One of the reasons that has exploded. Tax cuts reduced government revenue. And 5. A UBI doesn't cause inflation. Read 23. UBI does not cause inflation. Where hyperinflation occurred is because goods are scarce, and the logic behind objecting to a UBI basis of inflation were correct, and there ought to be no attempt to introduce jobs or increase wages as both increased purchasing and UBI's redistributive economic policy funded by taxing resources that contribute little to society, wealth, and passive income. Given we live in market societies, unchecked inflation is counterintuitive as competition is supported by rising purchasing power and serves to check prices. 6. COVID in 2008 means that the link turn outweighs the link. Even if the plan causes short-term shocks, only long-term structural recessions cause conflict. 7. Turn the affirmative prevents a long-term recession from rising inequality, which means that a long-term only the affirmative can solve. 8. The impact is empirically disproven because governments have bailed out numerous private companies in the past. Can I get a sip of water and then
Yeah.
Alright, I'm good.
Okay. First, on the benefits pick, why does expanding benefits resolve debt?
Well, we think that expanding benefits would resolve debt. It's not that expanding benefits would resolve debt. It's that expanding benefits through the Social Security Administration, which is what the affirmative does, resolves the debt that Social Security systems will accumulate. Our evidence isolates that over the next 75 years, the Social Security program will gain over $78 trillion of debt, and we think that that is bad. Only through increasing progressive taxes through the Social Security Administration can allow for that debt to be resolved.
The Social Security Trust Fund, which is the financing mechanism for Social Security benefits, is run through a separate program from the general revenues of the Department of the U.S. Treasury, which is where the debt for other things like the military is. How does Social Security affect debt broadly?
Well, yeah, again, that's the argument that I made above. They're going to accumulate over $78 billion of debt. $1 trillion, I apologize. We think that them collecting the revenue gained from progressive taxes is key. I think I answered that question with the first question.
On the interest rates, DA, why does inequality cause financial bubbles?
Yeah, our argument is that inequality means that purchasing power of everyday Americans decreases. And there's that causes less consumer spending, which means that the economy is structurally going to collapse. It is structurally unsustainable due to the rising rates of inequality. It is only by addressing inequality can we increase the consumer purchasing power of citizens in the United States, which is what is causing the economy to fall.
I understand your argument about consumer spending.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about what that internal link to financial bubbles are, because how does a lack of spending result
Well,
in
the financial bubbles argument is subpoint C, which is credit. We think that because Americans don't have enough money in the status quo, they rely on credit, and they have bad credit to fund their spending. This means that banks are giving out unsustainable loans, which means long-term, the banks will collapse as well as the economy.
The author's evidence you have read is about how the LEI is bad at predicting recessions. How does this apply to our data, which is about predictions of if the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates or not?
Well, we think the LEI makes a quantitative analysis and views short-term snapshots. We think short-term snapshots are bad. The argument about the author's card is a broad and general argument that says if you just look at the economy now, which is what the negative team has attempted to do by looking at, the inflation rate is low now, it's not super high. That is a bad model to look at economic sustainability. You have to look at the long-term aspect of the economy because there's more things to consider than just, are interest rates high right now? Is inflation high right now? There are things to consider like credit and inequality that only the affirmative can solve.
We have 8 minutes for subject.
That's absurd.
The reaction period is hilarious.
If it's somebody who lives in my town, I'm going after him, let me tell you. Dave and Tracy, plus Shantae and Timmy. I'm going after him. I get all next week in his tab room. He is just going to leave. I get Dave for 2 weeks in the tab room. I'm
Eleanor, what did you stop at?
gonna break him down.
450.
450? 50?
Yeah.
No, you're good. I believe you. I didn't mean to say it in a weird voice. Yeah, I just wanted to write it down.
She's also trying to get the panel.
That's right. You know, we were a little out of control there, sweetheart. So tell us where you're going.
Is it okay if I thank a few people first?
It is. Yeah, please do.
First,
You definitely get baked too.
I would love to thank the Pelham Foundation and the Barkley Forum and the Care Grant Foundation for running such an incredible tournament. I would like to thank Dr. Michaela Malson for running the tournament as well as the Barkley Forum and also for being such an incredible lab leader over the summer. I want to thank you all, the key coaches, for listening to and adjudicating this debate. I really appreciate your time. I would also like to thank you all for your unique contributions to the debate community. Debate is life-changing and world-changing for every student involved, so thank you so much for dedicating your careers to the most powerful educational activity you could possibly participate in. I would like to thank our opponents, Taipei American, for this debate. It's been great so far. I want to thank all the LASA coaches, Yao Yao Chen, David Kilpatrick, and Nihar Abienkar. They're all volunteers because LASA receives little support from the school. It's a public school, and each one of them has made such a unique contribution to allowing the public school to be nationally competitive, which is so incredible. I would like to thank my parents, of course, for always supporting my debate career. I owe them everything. And I would like to thank my partner and one of my closest friends, Jack Dollinger. It's such a privilege to debate with somebody who is so hardworking as Jack, and who is also incredibly calm and down to earth. He really grounds me, even though I can be a little intense and overbearing. So with that being said, the order for my speech will be the benefits pick, the inequality advantage, and then the welfare advantage. Is everyone ready? Okay. The benefits pick sufficiently solves the case by implementing progressive taxation, but avoiding the stimulus of the affirmative. The net benefit is the interest rates DA, which it avoids because the counterplan does not increase fiscal stimulus by adopting a universal basic income. The first argument that they make is permutation do both. However, the permutation links to our net benefit. Doing both would include doing the stimulus of the affirmative. That would force the Fed to raise interest rates. Next argument is that you must expand benefits. They say that that's necessary to solve debt. However, the counterplan is able to solve debt. The public debt is a function of the revenue the United States gets in minus the spending that the United States gives out. The counterplan implements the progressive tax. That means that it is able to take in new revenues, which are assets on the Treasury's balance sheets. You should frame this through their Carlson evidence about Social Security cuts, which says, quote, the exact cut will depend on estimates that year of the amount of tax revenues to be received and the benefits to be paid. This proves that the counterplan is able to solve the debt advantage because it increases government revenues. Next, they say it's unable to solve inequality. 1, the counterplan solves the inequality advantage. That's Abramov's vids. Their evidence says the counterplan would offset inequality because it would limit the accumulation of wealth by taxing wealth. It still includes the progressive taxation, which limits the regressive effects of our current tax structure. Second, the counterplan, even if it cannot solve the bulk of inequality, is able to make a dent in inequality. That's sufficient because their impacts are linear. There's no one way to measure how much inequality could affect our institutions, but if the counterplan can reduce the effect of inequality, then it can certainly cut into their impact. Now on the inequality advantage. First, the universal basic income increases inequality, poverty, and harms the economy. That's our McGough evidence. 1. The government will take the basic income as an opportunity to cut more effective welfare because they believe that the basic income alone provides a sufficient income. It gives politicians a blank check to cut programs like SNAP, Medicaid, and the child tax credit. That makes the plan regressive rather than progressive because it takes away transfer payments from low-income people and gives them out universally. 2. It reduces labor force participation. People who receive tens of thousands of dollars a year will leave the workforce or work part-time because they don't need the income. That reduces growth. First, they argue that people are already leaving the workforce due to automation. However, we will argue that automation is not causing the jobs to decline in the status quo. Second, even if that's the case, they accelerate people leaving the workforce before automation can fully replace jobs, which harms the economy. Next, they say that it's about $12,000, our evidence is about $12,000 a year. However, this magnifies our impact. The basic income being greater means that politicians would have even more of an excuse to cut more effective forms of welfare. However, when they say that it is $20,000 to $40,000 a year, that proves that they actually can't solve inequality because the living wage is around $70,000 a year. That's Ingle 23. Americans need an income of $68,499 to live comfortably in the US. The living wage was used to calculate living expenses. And the UBI increases inequality. That's Greenstein 19. Take the dollars targeted on people in the bottom fifth and convert them to universal payments. You're redistributing income upward. Would increase poverty and inequality. UBI entails abolishing programs. SNAP, EITC, Medicaid, Head Start, child care assistance make millions less poor. And it increases the cost of everything else. That's Blaine 20. It's far from effective and have consequences. Unemployment increase aid is a delay, not a fix. This program is too expensive. Cities issue fewer permits, limit housing supply, drive up the cost. Housing costs increase, the cost of living will increase. Drive up the cost of development. Guaranteed income draws attention away from the problem. Next, there's no automation. AI will not displace jobs. The World Economic Forum reports that 85 million jobs lost will be offset by 97 million new ones. Automating tasks creates new roles and increases competition for people entering the workforce. That's Orduna evidence. They argue that low-skilled jobs are being lost. However, they're being replaced with high-skilled jobs, which means that people will have an incentive to get higher education so they can enter those jobs. Next argument. Inequality is declining in the US. Increased government welfare, healthcare, and income growth are reducing poverty and closing the material gaps between the rich and the poor, even if income data shows that there is a gap. That's the right evidence. You should prefer our evidence. The affirmative square sheet evidence says that global inequality is increasing. That may be true, but the app has no ability to solve global inequality. Our evidence describes US inequality, which is more important for this debate. And the top line numbers don't account for rising social benefits. Pricing those in, inequality is not growing. That's Catherine et al. 20. Studies find increases in U.S. wealth inequality based on measures that exclude Social Security. By incorporating Social Security, top wealth shares have not increased. Social Security and private wealth are substitutes, massively important for low and middle income wealth. And inequality is declining. Graham 21. Census Bureau changed how it collects income, 93 in 2013. Changes distorted income, 15 times average change. Census explained limitations. However, warning's been neglected. We've made adjustments. Inequality is lower. Problem is shrinking. And it's reduced now. Lincoln 21. Standard measures of wealth inequality routinely omit the value of retirement funds and significantly understate wealth of most Americans and overstate wealth inequality. When these are included, share of the wealth held by the top 5% drops to 45%. 1 in 4 Americans, 40 to 49, was a millionaire. When you include present value of their retirement benefits. Next, no impact of poverty and inequality. There's no correlation between inequality and violence. Few people backlash, and perceptions don't match the real inequality. That's our must evidence. Go to the welfare advantage. First, Social Security is unsustainable. The trust fund will not run out. That's the purpose evidence. Their evidence cites financial projections. However, those are not going to materialize because Congress will inevitably intervene to shore up insecurity. You should prefer our evidence. They make the argument that our evidence is only a snapshot. However, that's not true. Our evidence describes long-term trends and accounts for the political motivations to change the benefit structure or the structure of payroll taxes to account for the unsustainability now. Next, there's no debt impact. It actually bolsters the economy because it finances public investment, which drives GDP growth and bolsters economic recovery. That's Kuttner. They argue that our evidence says interest rates don't hurt the economy. However, they've taken this line blatantly out of context from our evidence. In this paragraph, our evidence is speaking about the COVID recovery and says that high interest rates have not prevented the economy from recovering from COVID. However, this is our argument on the disadvantage. Interest rates have been fine up till now, but further increases would collapse the tech sector. Now, there's no downside to having a large national debt. Global financial and military hegemony ensures the U.S. can borrow indefinitely. All nations will invest in U.S. debt because if the U.S. cut spending in the global economy, it would collapse from increased demand. They say the debt ceiling disproves. However, this is a negative argument. It's been repeatedly raised, and every time people say that there will be a crisis, but this has never happened. The U.S. is not a corporation. It does not need to balance its budgets because it can borrow indefinitely. That's our Scharfenberg evidence. I'm open for cross-ex.
All right, you're good, right?
Uh-huh.
Let's start on case. Your inequality low now. The newest piece of evidence you've read is from 3 years ago. Why are those evidence snapshots still relevant and still hold true today?
I would actually argue that what you said on the other flow about how we need to look at long-term trends, not snapshots, is important. COVID might have temporarily changed the dynamics of inequality because people lost their jobs, but then the economy quickly rebounded and people got their jobs back.
I'm confused. Which piece of evidence have you read that takes into account the economy bouncing back from COVID when the newest piece of evidence read was 3 years ago?
The piece of evidence that we read in 2021, which is when the economy was recovering. Additionally, we've read uniqueness evidence on the disadvantage in the 1NC, and the 1NR will read more that describes the state of the economy. But also, I think that it's really important to look at long-term trends. The economy certainly bounced back, and overall we see that your projections are incorrect because they don't account for things like welfare benefits. That means even if there's a difference in income inequality, materially the poorest members of our society are generally accounted for.
Okay, so as of now, we can agree that long-term trends are the most important. Is that a correct description of what you just said?
We've said that that's the case for the question of inequality, but I think you're going to make that argument on the disadvantage. It's slightly different there because we've made a pretty contingent argument about the current dynamics of rate hikes and what kind of situation the budget sheets of the tech industry is.
Okay, sorry, I didn't understand anything you just said. Could you explain it again and how inequality is distinct from the economic collapse and why we should view those two?
On the disadvantage, we've made the argument that right now, if interest rates were to rise, tech companies would not be able to continue to operate because their model is premised on growth, which requires them to borrow. If interest rates are high, borrowing is too expensive.
Okay,
so long-term trends don't really account for the unique situation that they're in.
Okay, sorry to jump in, but if long-term a recession is coming now, if long-term a recession is going to come, wouldn't that mean that the impact would inevitably be triggered?
So two arguments. One is I don't necessarily agree that long-term a recession will come. Second, even if that's the case, recessions happen cyclically. They're probably inevitable. However, that's not what our impact is about because during recessions, the Fed cuts rates. Our argument is that it would actually be bad if rates were high. They continued to be high or they were raised.
So you said that recessions the economy is cyclical. That means there's boom cycles as well, which causes contractionary fiscal policy where rates are cut. Why rates are hiked? Why don't those rate hikes cause the impact?
I don't totally understand what you've said, but our impact says that right now there's been high rates for many, many months because 2 years the Fed has had to quell inflation. Right now, that's making it impossible for those tech companies to access investment. It causes crowd out. So it's just a question of what happens to rates in the next couple of months.
The 1NR has been sent out. It's just the interest hearing.
It's such my plan.
today? Are all good?
Sorry, give me a second to open it. Okay, yeah, I'm good.
Cool. Tech leadership outweighs their impact. Dominance deters Chinese aggression and territorial revisionism. Otherwise, weakness greenlights aggression that erodes the LIO and causes incursions in Taiwan and the SES. That results in nuclear escalation. Only tech growth and innovation allow us to maintain dominance against China. That's the Kronig evidence. This happens faster than any of their scenarios because it is about the perception of continued tech leadership. Things like climate change, disease, and inequality will take decades to cause extinction, but a nuclear war will happen quickly and escalate quickly. The DA also turns inequality. 1. A decline in hegemony destroys U.S. power, which means we can no longer adequately provide for U.S. citizens. 2nd, hyperinflation destroys purchasing power. It means the basic income given by the plan is insufficient to reduce inequality since everything costs more. I'm going to go to line by line, but you should frame each 2AC answer through the fact that the internal link to our impact is rate hikes, not a recession itself, which means each argument they make needs to be a reason the Fed would raise rates that would then hurt startups. The first argument they made is about growth being unsustainable. The first subpoint was inequality. They're wrong about the trends of inequality. That was in the 2&C. The second one is credit. There's no consumer debt impact. Demos 23. Delinquencies rising, but rate low. Trended below historical norms across all lending types. According, median savings higher. Consumers aren't moving into distress. Bankruptcies below the pre-pandemic period. The third warrant was automation, but they're wrong. Automation is an overblown threat. That was also in the 2&C. The fourth warrant is healthcare. The counterplan solves this because it generates revenues which makes healthcare systems sustainable. The fifth warrant is deficit spending. This is just an argument for why the case turns the DA. That's wrong. The internal link to the DA happens much quicker than their internal link to hegemony. Their internal link to hegemony is premised off about debt, meaning we can no longer finance the military. Our internal link is about a lack of tech innovation, which happens quicker. And the next argument they made is snapshot data is wrong. This card is about the LEI, not predicting if the Fed will raise interest rates or not. We have never made it, there are no rate hikes now. The Fed's preserved metric, the PCE, went down to its lowest level in 3 years, which means the Fed is ready to reduce rates. That's Sarifa. The economy is great now. Growth is increasing and inflation is decreasing. Brown and Urban 125. Forget the soft landing for U.S. economy. There was no landing at all. GDP reports show economic growth above trend with inflation falling sharply. Hot growth resulted from activity across the economy. Personal consumption rising. Businesses spent at a solid pace. Flourishing labor market, productivity gains, and supply side improvements meant the economy can keep growing without risking price pressure. The next argument they made is that the plan solves growth. This is not responsive to our link because we have made reasons why inflation is bad, not why slow growth or declining growth is bad. This means there's only a risk of link because they increase demand. I'll do the link debate here. Basic income is highly inflationary. Giving more money to individuals results in higher spending, which causes companies to then raise costs in response. That results in extremely high inflation. The Federal Reserve's response to inflation is to raise interest rates. So that means when the Federal Reserve perceives a plan, they will be forced to raise interest rates in order to prevent the economy overheating due to excess demand. That's Mitchell. Records confirm the Fed expects inflation when as Social Security is expanded, regardless of policy details, Romer 16. Social Security increases were irregular in timing and not part of a larger program. Perm increases raises aggregate spending. Impact is highly statistically significant. Tax changes are persistent and affect broader indicators. Evidence from Fed records confirm monetary policymakers believe benefit increases stimulated the economy and call for a contractionary response. Results suggest a permanent increase impacts the broader economy, echo results of previous studies. The next argument they made is about how our arguments are propaganda. No, it's not. Our evidence cites statistical studies and evaluates all the possible effects of the plan. The next argument they made is UBI does not cause inflation. The only warrant is taxes. 1. The advantage counterplan solves. It results in the same taxation scheme as the plan. Second, it does not matter if it's revenue neutral because it increases the velocity of money due to money being in the hands of people who spend more. That's voice 19. UBI transfer wealth from higher earners to low earners. Spurs higher consumption because those with lower incomes have higher prosperity to consume. Will create inflation. Rather than money going towards investment, it is to consumer goods. Fails to consider the velocity of money. If we put $12,000 in everyone's hands, consumer demand will rise, and so will velocity. Velocity increases, same $1 exchanges hands at a quicker rate. Since demand signals responds with higher prices. The next argument they made is about the labor market. It does not matter because people will still have an incentive to work less if they are guaranteed $24,000 each year. The next argument they made is about COVID. This disproves their impact but not ours. It's an example of economic decline not causing war, but it's not an example of rate hikes being thumped. The seventh argument they made is the turn. It does not matter if the plan can prevent recessions in the long term, because the immediate inflationary effect of the plan results in rate hikes that collapse tech dominance, which happens first. The last argument is bailouts. 1. This is just an assertion by them with no evidence. You should not accept that. Second, there's reasons why the government will not want to bail them out, because primary innovators in tech are risky startup companies. That's Rasco.
Time here.
I will,
8 minutes.
No, 7.
7:50.
7:50.
well, he is, he doesn't
Well, that we could do that. Some candidate. Yeah, that one. Oh, that is that.
Alright, the document has been sent.
What did you stop at?
556.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Can you double check the document?
Okay.
Sorry, I just sent it
There
again.
we go. Okay, thank
Alright.
you. You're fine. No stress. Everybody's good. That one, thank you. Oh.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Just start talking confidently and they'll
Okay, the order is inequality,
Good.
debt, advantage, healthcare advantage, the pick, the dissent.
One more time, because Jane and I were talking.
Inequality, healthcare, the counterplan argument, and then the dissent. Okay. My first one, oh, order? Did someone ask order?
Oh, no.
Sorry. Alright. Oh, sorry.
Have fun.
Alright, are we good?
Sorry, bad.
Inequality! inequality outweighs the disadvantage. They've conceded it undermines all institutions and collapses societal resilience, which ruins cooperation over climate change, disease, and polarization. All conceded impacts are assured that the huge amounts of inequality cause extinction and is try or die for the affirmative. They said that we increase inequality. One, this is not true, because even if it would cause cuts to other welfare, the government would never do that, because our evidence says that basic income plus other healthcare is what the government wants now. They said it collapses labor force, so through the automation debate below, but none of their evidence speaks to our studies, which are about both taxing plus basic income, which would decrease the cuts to the healthcare system because it would remove money from the economy, which answers their decide too. They said a living wage is $70,000. That's not true, because the combination of a progressive tax also means would decrease income inequality as per our explanations, which means that a 40K is sufficient. Our Jacobs evidence cites economic studies, while there are random CNBC reporters who only talk about 25 cities in the U.S. Well, we're talking about huge domestic inequality. They say automation still allows for jobs, but it forces people to go to high-skilled jobs. Even if they want high-skilled jobs, they can never get those in the short term, because there's going to be 300 million job loss from automation, which is our evidence and way more comprehensive about the U.S. economy. They said inequality is declining. Q-sheet is about U.S. inequality. The first time says domestic inequality, and it says that it's increasing. You can see it in the news. Post-COVID effects of cost income inequality, which means that for the average consumer, they have less money compared to 50 years before, which means that our evidence is way more comprehensive, because it cites the last 50 years. They said there's no impact, even if it's not about social unrest causing wars. They've conceded that huge inequality collapses institutions, which causes a litany of impacts. The second advantage, debt collapse ruins U.S. military power, which invites hegemonic transition wars and ruins international stability. That's the 1AC root of evidence. They said Congress intervenes. That is our argument. If we do not change debt now, Congress would intervene future, trapping the U.S. in a huge debt crisis. They agree that debt is inevitable, so you have to vote affirmative to stop the debt. They said there's no downside to debt. It does not assume $75 trillion of debt built up in the economy, which has obviously caused huge fiscal panic. The counterplan. It's not true. Our plan says that the only way to change unsustainable social security operations is for distributing it in a new way than before, which is a basic income, which is not how current benefits. So doing a basic income is the only way to restructure the social security system, which is the only way to solve debt. They have not had an answer to this, and Dylan made this argument clearly in the 2AC. They say they've solved inequality. Also not true, because you need a basic income to solve poverty, which is all my explanation above, but their counterplan don't give money for the people, which is doing less than the case, which is worse, because you would never want to do less than the case, and if they just a part of the case, you can just do the whole case and solve inequality. There's no reason why they should do the counterplan. Go to the DISAC. The whole economy is going to collapse if you do not do the plan, which is worse than a one-time inflationary rate hike. Their impact is about hegemonic collapse. Every reason they argue for it is a reason to vote AF, because we solve it too. Our advantage solves U.S. hegemonic decline by preventing sources of debt and fiscal crisis, meaning the plan is best. And every time you think about voting for it, they said vote AF to also solve U.S. hegemonic decline. It's not faster, because MAD would always check conflict with inequalities, a structural risk that destroys institutions and society from the ground up, reducing our capacity to respond to anything. There's no turn to these arguments, because people would still maintain spending with the basic income, which means that it would not collapse spending, which answers their turn chase argument. But the link turn outweighs the link. It injects the plan injects trillions into the economy, boosting consumer spending, solving inequality, and increasing taxes to offset inflation. That's the Hoynes, Aberman, and Reed evidence. Prefer our authors. We cite senior researchers in economics. Their evidence is from conservative hacks, and they have no quals. They're literally CNBC writers. The healthcare, I'll go for the healthcare warrant. Their only answer is that the counterplan solves, but they've conceded that rising healthcare would cause huge interest rate hikes, which means that doing the plan is the only way to solve a healthcare right. There's also which makes the entire impact. Now you need cross agree that they agree that's about long-term trends that matter most, which means that healthcare is the one thing that you have to prioritize. They said snapshots. They said that they were not snapshots. They read evidence about the U.S. talking about only the next couple of months, which is not predictive of a future recession way down the line, which our evidence is about. It's also does not assume post-COVID revenge spending, which our Jacobs evidence from 2023, the most recent inequality evidence, says is a driving factor of decline of demand now. They say the plan is inflationary. Not true. One, it's contingent on a higher perception of too much demand, which is not the plan, because currently consumer demand and income demand is way down, which means that the plan is key to level the playing field by giving people income. Two, it doesn't assume taxes, which pulls money out of the economy. They said that there's a velocity of inflation, but that's not true, because we are a progressive tax. We tax individuals in the economy, which would simultaneously pull the money that they're spending out of it. And that's the inequality is terrible for the economy, because it causes decreased consumer spending, social polarization, and less spending in circulation in the economy, which are all things that would drive, which would drive inflation in the long term. The last thing is that they are blowing rate hikes way out of the proportion. The rate that we raise, rates are average. Saudi 23 Fed raised rates through it all. GDP hot, consumer spending strong. The job market showed very few signs of weakening. Weather swift at highest in 40 years. Rate hikes may feel high, but they're relatively tame to history. Large share of shareholders and businesses have locked in borrowing costs and do not need to roll back their debt.
450.
say, yeah.
Is everyone ready for the order of the 2&R? First, it will be the tech leadership or the interest rates disadvantage. Then it will be the benefits pick. Then it will be the inequality advantage. And then the welfare advantage. Is everyone ready? The US is in an existential competition for technological leadership with China. This comes first in your decision-making calculus. The disadvantage outweighs on time frame. Failure to out-innovate China greenlights expansion. It changes the balance of power. Tech innovations are crucial for the future of military dominance. That's our Kronig evidence. It says that failure to maintain technological superiority will greenlight a Chinese invasion of Taiwan and incursions into the SCS. That goes nuclear. High rates are awful for the tech industry. Interest rates are the cost it takes for companies to borrow. Tech companies rely on a strategy that emphasizes borrowing, but that requires low rates because that means borrowing is cheap. High rates means tech companies cannot afford to borrow. It becomes too expensive because they have to pay back more later. They're fine now because they were able to refinance their debt during the pandemic when rates were extremely low. However, high rates are squeezing their ability to grow. They can't invest in new projects, hire workers, fund expansion, or invest in new research and development. That constrains technological innovation. That's our Risco evidence. The affirmative has not answered the thesis of our disadvantage about how interest rates affect tech companies. That means that if you conclude the AF results in the Fed to raise interest rates or to keep them the same, you must vote negative. First, they argue the economy will collapse. However, the economy is resilient and strong now. That's our Brown evidence, which is from this week. There's been more than a soft landing. Consumption is incredible. The GDP report shows that there's growth, and the Fed is finally cooling inflation, which is why they're going to cut rates this quarter. Next, they say that they're able to solve hegemonic decline. That's not the case. Our carry evidence isolates that the key internal link to hegemonic decline is tech innovation. That will determine the future of economic and military competitiveness, not the debt crisis. It's key to the balance of power. Next, they say the link turn. However, their link turn is our link to the disadvantage. When they say that they, quote, inject trillions into the economy, that is inflationary. That is trillions of dollars in new spending, which will contribute to inflation and make the Fed decide to cut interest rates. Next, they say rising healthcare costs. First, how does this interact with interest rates? If it were true, then healthcare costs are deflationary, not inflationary, because they would reduce spending on other issues. But they also haven't read an impact to rising healthcare costs. So it's a cool FYI, but it's not important. Second, the internal link is solved by the counterplan. The counterplan is able to avoid the government's incentives to cut Medicaid because it's able to increase revenues. Next, they say that there's no inflation. Yes, inflation. UBI funds new spending because it transfers money from those with a high marginal propensity to spend, i.e. wealthy folks with progressive taxes, with a low marginal propensity to spend, to those with a high marginal propensity to spend, who are low-income folks. That's our 1NC Russ-Lugin evidence. They say our evidence does not assume taxes. That's not the case. Their taxes increase the velocity of money. Our evidence assumes the effects of redistribution and says that because they transfer money to those with a high propensity to spend, that would be inflationary. But they've also dropped the perception link. Even if they're right that the plan is not inflationary, the Fed believes that it will be, so they will immediately raise interest rates. That's the wrong evidence. Next, they say that there's no impact to rate hikes. However, this is about current rates. This is our uniqueness argument, which is that rate hikes are fine now because tech companies were able to refinance their debt, but continued high rates will trigger our disadvantage. Now the benefits pick. At the end of the day, you know one thing. The deficit is equal to revenue minus government spending. The counterplan is able to take in trillions in revenue. That means it solves the debt. It solves the debt the same way the affirmative claims to solve the debt. They claim to solve the debt through the tax. The counterplan also passes the tax. However, it's preferable to the plan because it avoids the net benefit. It does not engage in any inflationary stimulus. Because it only taxes, it does not spend, which means it does not cause the Fed to cut rates. They say we have to restructure Social Security. That's not the case. It's just a question of revenues. It creates revenues for the government, which means that it does not spike the debt. On to the inequality. Inequality is overblown. It's declining. That's the right evidence. 1, material gaps have decreased. Even if income inequality is high, the robust social safety net ensures that people are taken care of. That's our right evidence and our CAF evidence. Their evidence overstates the effect of inequality because it's based off faulty data. Automation is also not a big threat. Automation will not replace jobs, it will create new jobs and high-skilled workforce, which means the plan is not necessary. Now, I'm not going to need to extend any defense to the debt advantage because it's solved by the counterplan.
I think we have 5:56. I'll start that.
We're getting closer to critical mass, yeah. It's the press house. No. Go to that turnaround time. Oh yeah, they said they were some of their favorites of the it's getting close.
Yeah, I mean, because we have MSBA stuff. So, yeah. Once the day is over, I'll train them, well, I'll train them.
Order is going to be. Oh, all right. Sorry.
Check.
Too many judges.
Never.
A very good number of judges.
Not really small compared to some.
I was gonna say, I've been small companies been 27.
This is small. Number 29. I think we're good now.
All right. The order is going to be advantage 1, the inequality advantage, and then the benefits pick, and then the economy disadvantage. All right. Are all 19 changes good? All right. I'll see you then. All right. Vote affirmative to expand Social Security by eliminating welfare qualifications and providing benefits to everyone in the U.S. This would boost growth and promote economic stability in the long term, which prevents terrible recessions that cascades to economic collapse. Voting negative for the disadvantage is like putting a Band-Aid on a severed arm. Our thesis is that there are problems independent of inflation and interest rates that make recessions inevitable, and only the affirmative solves. Independently, they drop that inequality causes extinction, that's outside of economic collapse, things like social collapse and institutional collapse, which cascades because it causes extinction due to the failure to respond to threats like global warming. That was completely dropped in the 2NR. This should frame your decision. The only out they have is on the time frame analysis, but this is wrong. The 2NR only says the words time frame but does not compare our impact to theirs. You have no clue what the time frame scenario for theirs looks like, but I'll get to that on the disadvantage. But short-term shocks do not cause large existential recessions. The 1AR cited examples like COVID and 08, which had recession hikes due to the revenge spending that occurred after COVID-19, which did not cause the economic decline in Chinese technological leadership that the 2NR claims. The only chance for a large-scale collapse is through increasing inequality and structural issues that only the affirmative solves. Now, only we solve inequality because we give a universal basic income to everyone, which allows people to afford basic necessities that they can't afford right now. We provide 20 to 40K a year, which you can be sure of will decrease economic inequality, but independently Unfortunately, their only argument is that inequality is low now, but that is wrong. Inequality is high. You should look towards our Jacobs and Qureshi evidence, which are from 2023, which postdates their evidence by over 3 years. Their only warrant as to why inequality is low now is because of the social safety net, but they have not contested the Qureshi evidence, which makes a claim in 2023 that people are slipping through the social safety net and that it is failing, which means economic inequality is high. Our evidence postdates theirs, which takes into account what the safety net looks like now, which is what you should prefer on the benefits pick. I don't really have to do much work here when I'm going for the inequality impact, and the 2NR does zero analysis as to why the benefits pick would solve inequality. It's pretty logical to assume this because you don't expand benefits. There's no reason why you would solve inequality absent that, which is our key internal link on the economy disadvantage. First, they say that this ad outweighs on time frame. This is wrong. They did no time frame analysis. You have no idea when China will win the tech race or when tech companies and private companies will stop borrowing money. These are the questions that you have to resolve before you decide to vote negative. The 2NR does not provide the answer for you, so you should not vote for them. Compare this to the affirmative scenario, which is a dropped inequality impact, which you know will cause institutional collapse due to the distrust in government institutions, which makes the government unable to respond to threats like global warming. This is the only impact scenario that you can be sure of, which is what you should vote on. But then next they say that high interest rates means that there's no growth. This is wrong. We turn this because we prevent structural recessions, which means that even if their internal link is distinct and about interest rates, we still prevent a larger scale recession, which is what you should be voting on in this debate. Even if you conclude that we don't solve for 100% of their disadvantage, we solve for a sufficient amount for the external impact of inequality to outweigh any possible deficit to the link turn. But the next argument that they make is that we are inflationary and our link argument is wrong. But this is wrong. Our link is about solving inequality, which prevents decreasing consumer spending. They did not have enough work on this. The inequality is bad for the economy because it decreases consumer spending and causes social polarization, which is a warrant in the one era that they drop because people don't have access to basic necessities like food, housing, and healthcare. If people can't spend money or be productive, the economy is naturally going to fail. That is a logical conclusion that you should have. We cite the Jacobs evidence, who is a political economist specializing in inequality-related issues. So the affirmative is the only way to solve for the economy. Absent voting for the affirmative, you not only will ensure long-term economic collapse, but short-term extinction from global warming. So it is try or die to prevent existential climate change like warming.